At dinner, my son-in-law was laughing. Not a kind, shared laugh that warms a room, but a sharp, barking sound that sliced through the clinking of silverware. He leaned back in his chair, a smug grin plastered on his face, the picture of a man who believed he'd won a race I didn't even know I was running. My daughter, Clara, sat beside him, her gaze fixed on her plate, her silence a heavy blanket of betrayal. My wife, Eleanor, just looked tired, her gentle attempts to steer the conversation into safer waters having failed completely. Mark, my son-in-law, locked his eyes on me, his voice dripping with condescending glee. "So, tell me, Arthur," he said, loud enough for the entire restaurant to pretend not to hear, "how does it feel to be a loser?" The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Loser. For 40 years, I had poured my blood, sweat, and soul into Sterling Homes, building it from a single pickup truck and a set of second-hand tools into the most respected custom home builder in the state. I'd built landmarks, communities, the very house my daughter grew up in. Last week, the news broke that Sterling Homes had been acquired, absorbed by a soulless corporate giant. To the outside world, and clearly to Mark, it looked like a failure, a capitulation. The old lion being put out to pasture by the sleek, modern wolves of the industry, like the firm Mark worked for, Apex Designs. He saw it as my empire crumbling and his own star rising. I felt a hot surge of anger, a primal urge to flip the table and wipe that smirk off his face. But 40 years in business teaches you patience. It teaches you that the loudest man in the room is often the weakest. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to stew in his own arrogance. I picked up my water glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and set it down with a soft click. I looked past him, at my daughter, whose refusal to meet my eye was a knife in my gut. Then I turned my gaze back to Mark, a calm, placid smile spreading across my face. I hadn't lost. Oh, far from it. He just didn't know the rules of the game he was playing. I let him savor his moment of triumph, this pathetic little victory he had constructed in his mind. I smiled and asked, "That's an interesting question, Mark, but let me ask you one first. How does it feel to have a new boss?" Mark's laughter died in his throat. His grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "What are you talking about, old man? I work for Apex. You sold your dusty old company to Omnicorp." He said the name like it was an insult, a corporate behemoth that swallowed legacies whole. Clara finally looked up, her expression a mixture of guilt and bewilderment. Eleanor's hand found mine under the table, her grip tight and questioning. I kept my smile in place, letting my words sink in. "I did sell Sterling Homes," I confirmed, my voice even and calm. "But you seem to be misinformed about who the buyer was. It wasn't Omnicorp. That was just a rumor I was happy to let circulate." I leaned forward slightly, my smile turning a little sharper at the edges. I sold Sterling Homes, its assets, its contracts, and its entire portfolio to a private investment group, a group that, as of this morning, also completed a hostile takeover of Apex Designs. So, I'll ask you again, Mark, how does it feel to work for me? The color drained from Mark's face. The smug superiority vanished, replaced by a ghastly pale shock. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she looked back and forth between her husband and me. "You're lying!" Mark stammered, his voice losing its confident baritone. "Apex is a titan. Your little company, you couldn't." He was sputtering, the gears in his mind grinding to a halt as he tried to process the impossible. "Couldn't I?" I said, taking a bite of my steak. It tasted like victory. It turns out, a company with no debt, a 40-year reputation for quality, and a portfolio of loyal high-net-worth clients is quite an attractive acquisition. especially to an investment group that was already looking for a way to get a controlling interest in a mismanaged, over-leveraged, and frankly, arrogant company like Apex. The rest of the dinner was a blur of tension. Mark was silent, his food untouched. Clara looked like she was on the verge of tears. He practically dragged her out of the restaurant as soon as the check was paid, without so much as a goodbye. Eleanor and I drove home in a thick, charged silence. When we finally walked into our home, a home I built with my own hands, she turned to me, her eyes wide. "Arthur, is it true? All of it?" I nodded, exhaustion finally seeping into my bones. "Every word, my love." She hugged me tightly, a mix of relief and shock. "But why didn't you tell me? I thought we were losing everything." I held her close, the familiar scent of her perfume a comfort. Because I couldn't be sure it would work until the very last signature was on the page. And because, I said, my voice hardening, who would stand by me when they thought I had nothing left? The next day, I didn't go to an office. Instead, I went to my workshop, the place where Sterling Holmes was truly born. Surrounded by the scent of sawdust and varnish, I let myself think. The takeover wasn't born from revenge, not initially. It was born from survival. For the past 18 months, Sterling had been losing bids to Apex by impossibly slim margins. Projects I should have won, with clients I'd worked with for decades, were slipping through my fingers. It felt wrong. It felt personal. My bids weren't just being beaten, it felt like they were being read. I hired a private cybersecurity firm, a quiet one, run by an old army buddy. I didn't tell anyone, not even Eleanor. I just said I was upgrading our systems. 2 months later, he called me. There was a breach, a slow, methodical leak of data over the past year and a half. Bid proposals, material cost sheets, subcontractor lists, everything. And the access point was traced back to an IP address, my home IP address. There was only one person besides me and Eleanor who had the password to our home network, my daughter, Clara. The realization had hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The idea that my own child could be complicit in the destruction of my life's work was a pain I couldn't have imagined. That was when the plan began to form. It was no longer about survival. It was about justice. The silence from Clara was deafening. 2 days passed without a word. No angry text, no tearful phone call. Just a void where my daughter used to be. It was a confirmation of the ugly truth I had been avoiding. She wasn't an innocent bystander. She was a participant. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I called her. She answered on the 5th ring, her voice small and shaky. "Dad?" "Meet me for coffee, Clara. Alone," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. We met at a small, neutral cafe downtown. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she fidgeted with her napkin, tearing it into tiny shreds. She wouldn't look at me. "I know, Clara," I began, keeping my voice low and steady. "I know about the bids. I know about our home network." A choked sob escaped her lips. The dam broke, and everything came pouring out in a torrent of guilt and regret. It had started subtly. Mark would complain about his dinosaur of a boss at Apex, then pivot to complaining about me. How I was old-fashioned, how Sterling Holmes was stuck in the past. He told her I was going to run the company into the ground, taking her inheritance with it. He framed it as a rescue mission. He just needed to see my proposals, he'd said, to learn from them, to help Apex modernize, and to secure his own position, ensuring he could provide for her. He swore it was harmless, just a little corporate reconnaissance that everyone did. He made her feel like a partner, a co-conspirator in their glorious future. She would wait until my wife and I were asleep, log onto my computer in the home office, and download the files to a thumb drive. She knew it was wrong, but she was so caught up in Mark's ambition, so convinced by his narrative of my impending failure, that she went along with it. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she wept, her face buried in her hands. "I never thought. I didn't understand what he was really doing. I thought he was just trying to get ahead." I listened, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. The betrayal was deeper than I imagined. It wasn't just data. It was a fundamental breach of trust, of love. I wanted to rage, to shout, to ask her how she could do this to the man who taught her how to ride a bike and checked for monsters under her bed. But looking at her broken form, I saw not a villain, but a fool. A pawn in a game she didn't understand, manipulated by the man she loved. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her whole body flinched. "It's done, Clara," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "But the story isn't over yet." She looked up, her eyes filled with confusion. "What do you mean? You bought his company. You won." I shook my head slowly. That was just the opening move. You see, the investment group that bought Apex, they don't actually exist. Clara's eyes widened. "What?" "It's a shell corporation," I explained, leaning in. "A temporary vessel. The real buyer, the one who now owns Sterling Homes and Apex Designs, is a company called Bedrock Holdings. They're the largest residential developer on the East Coast. For years, they've wanted to crush Apex, their main competitor in this region. But they couldn't find a legal way in." I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle. "So, I made them a deal. I gave them one. I didn't just sell them my company, Clara. I sold them a meticulously documented multi-million-dollar corporate espionage lawsuit, with a star witness who is willing to testify. I didn't just sell my company. I sold Mark's crime." Clara stared at me, her mind visibly struggling to connect the dots. "A lawsuit? Against who?" "Against Apex Designs for corporate theft," I said calmly, "and against Mark, personally, for conspiracy and damages." Her face went white. "No, Dad, you can't. He'll be ruined. He'll go to jail." "Actions have consequences, Clara," I said, my voice firm but not without a trace of sorrow for the pain she was feeling. "He didn't just try to get ahead. He tried to destroy me, using you as his weapon. He gambled with your loyalty, your freedom, and my entire life's work. The house always wins, and he was never playing with his own money." I told her the rest of it, how Bedrock's legal team had been working in parallel with my sale, preparing the case. The takeover of Apex wasn't just a business acquisition. It was a legal maneuver to gain access to all of their internal records, to prove exactly how they used my stolen data. I arranged one last family gathering. I told Clara to bring Mark. I said it was time to discuss the future, to be adults about the new corporate structure. Mark arrived at my house radiating a false, swaggering confidence. He had clearly recovered from his initial shock and had convinced himself it was all a bluff, that I was just a bitter old man who got lucky. He probably thought he could negotiate a hefty severance package. He walked into my living room, where Eleanor, Clara, and I were waiting. "Arthur," he began, a condescending smile already forming, "I'm willing to be the bigger man here. Let's talk about my transition. Obviously, my expertise will be invaluable to, what was it? Bedrock?" I didn't say a word. I simply slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the coffee table toward him. It wasn't from me. The embossed logo on the front read, "Bedrock Holdings, Office of the General Counsel." Mark's smile faltered. He opened it. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. The swagger evaporated, replaced by a creeping dread. He saw the official notice of termination from his position at Apex, effective immediately. He saw the summons, the official complaint detailing the charges: corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, wire fraud. He saw the demand for $7 million in punitive damages, naming him as the primary defendant. He saw the sworn affidavits from the cybersecurity firm. And at the very back, he saw the final, damning piece of evidence: a signed, notarized confession from his wife, Clara, detailing his entire scheme. His head snapped up, his gaze flying from the document to Clara, who sat there, pale and resolute, refusing to look at him. Then his wild, desperate eyes landed on me. He was speechless, utterly broken. The man who sat before me was a hollowed-out shell, the bravado stripped away to reveal the pathetic, greedy core. He looked smaller, weaker, a boy playing dress-up in his father's suit. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, savoring not his defeat, but the quiet restoration of order, of justice. I leaned forward, my voice low and clear, echoing his own words back at him from that disastrous dinner. "You asked me how it felt to be a loser," I said, my smile gone, replaced by a cold, hard finality. "I think you've got it all figured out now. But just so we're clear, Mark, tell me, how does it really feel?" What goes around comes around. If you believe in karma, deliver some good karma to this channel by hitting subscribe and liking the video. We appreciate your support, and we'll be back with more justice soon.